I will tell today about particle migration behavior in the separation, during the separation in the lab on a disk device. So I present the microflow group, the Department of Chemical Engineering of the VUB, and the link to the program of the group head by Wim de Malsche is the water pipeline, water fit for use. And I show here one example of water purification technique. This is related to using acoustic radiation force, which is focusing particles, microparticles in the flow such that they follow the central line, and the pure water, clean water is removed from these depleted water chambers. So I will talk today about centrifugation. So the centrifuge, it's well, device which is well known, doesn't require any deep introduction. But if you put several devices in one chip, it will be like a known platform, known like a lab on a chip. And in top, if you rotate this device, then you have so-called lab on a disk, rotating disk. And actually, in addition to the LOC platform, which has advantages of portability, a small amount of reagents and fast reaction times, programmability. In addition, you have also a mixture due to the additional forces which rotate the fluid, rotate the particles, and they mix them. So, and applications are quite wide for biomedical diagnostic, liquid handling, automation for the life sciences, and process analytical techniques, cell line development in biopharma, environmental, infrastructural, industrial processes. Well, I mentioned here application for detection and treatment of pathogens. For example, many papers about salmonella. Also recently, they discussed possibility of using it for COVID-19 detection. And in the microflow group recently, there was a platform developed which is intended for detection of parasite eggs, which are living in humans and animals. And it uses LOD platform for isolation and collecting eggs, which was successfully recently tested in several countries in Africa. And this is published in the paper below. So, well, we try to talk today not about the output of the devices, but mainly about what happens inside, to have a closer look inside the chamber of this platform. And for centrifugation, the mechanism is very well understood. So we have a centrifugal force which actually causes the radial motion of particles could lead to separation of those particles. But in fact, if you have a look to the chamber, like taking picture of it, consequent picture after some time, we can find something quite interesting, which is not in line with what we expect to have, like due to just centrifugal force. We have some complex patterns as shown on the right. So the particle first is detected in position 1, 2, and then zigzag, and then goes down, and down goes back, which is strange because it's like against the centrifugal force. And generally, if we just, well, don't care about that, we can think, okay, these are some imperfections that can happen, but we don't know the reason. And the goal of this study is to have a closer look at the processes which happen during the centrifugation, and particularly the focus with the light particles, with the density which is lower of density of the fluid. And this is just general, well-known theoretical description what happens in the rotating disk. So we have a Newton equation of motion, and then if we just have the same equation of motion in rotating frame, then we have additional terms, and these terms are just called pseudo forces. These are not real forces which are induced by some action, but this is just forces because of inertia. So they distinguish Euler force due to acceleration in the radial direction, Coriolis force, which is proportional to the velocity and normal to the velocity, and the centrifugal force, which is proportional to the radius. So in addition, we have also buoyancy, which is related to the particle are inserted in fluid, and Archimedean or rotating, and also we consider stock drag, because when particles move through the fluid, it actually experiences drag. Interesting to note that actually the mass of the particles is renormalized. The mass is not just the bare mass, but actually it's corrected by the fluid. We should subtract the mass of the fluid of the same volume, and if the mass of the fluid of the same volume is larger than that, then effectively we have this term negative, which means that all the signs here change all the terms here change the sign. So it's quite difficult to imagine what happens, because even for massive particles, without this change of sign, it's not so easy to imagine. That's why we start first with massive particles. And if we have this trajectory of particle moving in the disk, then it actually moves like that in the curved trajectory. And we have the velocity which changes like that, and the Coriolis force, which always try to deviate the motion. So, and if we imagine the projection of the chamber, like we have a narrow chamber or we have a wide chamber, then in a narrow chamber, actually, the particle, when it meets the wall, it will have just a small component of the velocity normal to the wall. All the velocity will be mainly along the wall. And in the wide chamber, the situation is quite different, because then the projection is small of the velocity, but what is large, the projection of the Coriolis force. Or in addition, we also have Euler force. Now we have boundary, we have all the forces here, so I will not list all of them, but we have Coriolis force, we have Euler force, we have centrifugal force, and if we carefully project all of them on the wall, we can have something like that they will be net velocity. And this net velocity, if far from the center, will be along the centrifugal force, which means the particle will move in the same direction. But interestingly, when we have this to happen close to the center of rotation, then this projection in the end could be negative. So the particle could move not in the direction of the centrifugal force, but the opposite direction. So generally, theoretically, we can see that it's possible that particle, when it meets a wall, could move opposite direction. And this is the origin, to understand the origin of backward motion. So, well, now it's easy already to understand what happens if we invert everything. Now we have light particles. So the particles which are lighter than the fluid, and then the motion will be like that. Just believe me, or you can intuitively check that. So the particle moves now not to the periphery, but moves to the center. And once it moves to the center, the Coriolis force acts in this direction, deviating to the motion trajectory to the wall. When it meets the wall, actually, it starts moving back. Then the Coriolis force is directed already to the opposite direction and actually detaches the particle from the wall back to the interior. So it's quite strange, complex behavior, actually, and that's very simple and well understood device. We have a numerical calculation. We just solved the equations which were shown before for different situations, and this is for light particles. And if the particle just moves without any border, it will follow this orange line. And if it meets the wall, it will follow the line as predicted before in those cartoons. And now, interesting point, when the particle moves back. So if we just have no radial angular acceleration, then the particle just follows this red trajectory. Then we have we start to rotate particles with chamber with acceleration, like small acceleration. Then particles moves to the wall, but still follows the same direction. So we need quite strong acceleration to turn the particle to move back. And this situation depends on where we are. If we are closer to the center, then actually we need smaller acceleration to turn the particle back. So it's an interesting result. And actually it explains the behavior which we just commented. So, and another interesting point is the width of the channel. So if we have very wide channel, it's enough to have quite small acceleration to turn it back. And not only turn it back, but also to detach it from the wall, as was predicted in those cartoons before. But when we decrease the width of the chamber, actually we see that some moderate acceleration doesn't help anymore. So the particle will still move in the same direction. So we need really strong acceleration to turn it back. And this effect is even stronger in case of very narrow channel, which means that taking narrow channels helps to prevent this undesirable, if we don't desire them, if we don't want them, effects. But on the other hand, we should also have some balance between the width of the channel, because if channel is very narrow, then we have only a few particles, and then the effect of is quite small. So, but this allows us to actually engineer and design devices. And in experiment, it was used for this observation. The chambers, like this platform with 4 chambers, and it was placed on the centrifuge, and then images were taken after 5 or 15 seconds with 2 sorts of particles, 123 micrometers and 60 micrometers, which actually coincide with the size of X. And the density was taken such that it models the behavior of X. And during the observation, we found this interesting zigzag and backwards motion patterns. But interesting, as we just found in our calculations, that for narrow channels, particles moves preferably towards the output. So we first inject it here, it moves, it has sometimes like this strange motions, but in general, the trend is that it rectifies, it goes from the outer to the inner. But if we take a wider channel, it was like 2.5 times wider, we see this quite weird behavior. And actually, if you have a look and have no idea about that, it looks really strange what happens. But actually, now we know what happens. We see that actually there is backward motion due to this effect of combination of the Coriolis force, the Euler force, and the effect of boundaries. So, and another experiment with 60 micrometers polystyrene particles, which are shown here, we see the same behavior. And again, we see this backwards motion close to the center of rotation, where the angle between the chamber, the wall of the chamber, and the radial direction is large, because here it's small and this is large. So actually, this is the angle which monitors the possibility of the backward motion. So, well, conclusions are that we had a closer look at the centrifugal processes in Lyapunov disk device. Generally, the motion is like either from the center to the periphery or other way around for heavy or light particles. But if we have boundaries, then it depends what is the angle between the boundary in particular point and the rotation and the direction of the radius, and then depending on that, and also eventually on the acceleration which this device acquires, it can happen that actually the motion will happen to the opposite direction to the expected, which is predicted by centrifugal force. And this is more important for light particles, because light particles, when they arrive to the output is in the center, not at the periphery. At periphery, the effect is small. That's why when we centrifuge light particles, it's important to take this into account. And this is our goal to be equipped with this knowledge, which helps us to design better device. And actually, we can calculate for any shape and then predict the behavior and then think, do we need or do we not need a device of this shape? And we can improve in that way. So the perspectives and applications, well, applications is important is understanding of the effect for proper analysis and design. And then we can avoid or minimize the effect which we don't like. And more even challenging is that actually we can think not only about killing the effect at all, but using the effect. Like we just saw that particles behave differently depending on their properties. Where they are, what is the size, what is the mass, what is the composition. And if they behave differently and we can control this behavior, of course, we straightforward can think about the selectivity. And this is actually our next goal in this cooperation. And the cooperation also includes various devices and techniques for like acoustic radiation, and also this vortices created by different mechanisms. And the contributors to this paper, to mention these are here, the names of them and the contact details. And then I would like to thank you for your attention.
Yes.